So good morning, everybody. We're going to get started in just a minute or so. I'm going to give people just another minute to log on. But I hope everybody can hear me. I'm Kim Shelf with Hamilton County Public Health, and I'm here with Stacey Todd from Hamilton County Planning. So we're really excited about our Complete Streets webinar for you all today. And we hope that you find it as informative as we've found it, kind of putting it together and learning some new things ourselves. So if during the course of the webinar you have a question, you can type it into the chat on the left side of your screen, and we'll leave time at the end to kind of answer some questions. As we go through, hopefully everything's clear, but we will be recording this so that it'll be available afterwards to review or share with other people that you think might be interested as well. So we're going to give everybody just a couple more minutes because it looks like a few people are still signing on, and then we'll get started.
Alrighty, well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. As Kim mentioned, she's with Hamilton County Public Health, and I am Stacey Todd. I'm an associate planner with Hamilton County Planning and Development, and I've been working with the county. The summer will be about 2 years, so I've been learning a lot and meeting with representatives from jurisdictions, village administration, township trustees, and it's been quite a learning process and something that I myself have been hearing from you all, and Kim has mentioned hearing through her work with We Thrive are concerns about street safety and street construction and infrastructure repair, and so we thought this would be a really great topic to partner on. And if there are any, like she said, any additional questions, we can follow up at the end of the presentation. Is there anything else you want to say, Kim, about your work with We Thrive?
No, I'm just that, we get a lot of questions about complete streets in the work that we do as well, and I think it's a topic that people maybe have heard the term but don't really know what it is, and that's one of the reasons that we wanted to kind of do a webinar, do a presentation to have some information for folks, so if they are interested, at least they kind of know what it is and sort of how to get started, and then certainly this isn't going to cover everything about complete streets, but we feel like it's a good sort of primer and a starting point to then hopefully kick off further conversations and discussions. So
yeah, we'll just go ahead and jump right in then. Our presentation, there we are. We'll give you our contact information at the end of the presentation as well, so if you have any follow-up questions. But our outline for today's webinar is we're going to discuss a little bit, like Kim said, the basics of what are complete streets and on contrast, what are incomplete streets, and we want to talk about some examples here in Hamilton County and local efforts that are currently underway or there's planning underway for complete street work and projects related to the concept. We'll talk a little bit about funding sources. I found definitely in working with jurisdictions that a lot of times there's support for projects, but really a lot of the issue comes down to where are the dollars coming from. So we want to make sure that we provide some resources for that. We'll talk a bit about what a complete street policy is, and then we'll end with a call to action and talk a little bit about how to draft a policy and the efforts that are needed to adopt them. So what a complete street is essentially, in a very basic form, they're streets for all users. The makeup of our community and regional transportation networks influence all of us, whether it's determining the routes and time of our daily commutes, our ability to access goods and services, the ease and safety of getting to and from places which make up our life stories. Ensuring that our street networks are complete allows street users the safest and most convenient experience possible. So this is something that planners and health officials can influence in a really positive way. As planners and health officials, we care about promoting inclusivity, and transportation is certainly a topic which highlights this. We want to make sure that our residents here in the county are provided transportation options regardless of ability or income. And so some of the basics of a complete street, and it doesn't have to necessarily mean that all these components are present, but things like active sidewalks, ensuring that your sidewalks are wide enough for walkers to feel safe, and that there are appropriate like ADA compliant curb ramps so that people who are using a walker or a wheelchair have access to the sidewalk from the street, that there are dedicated bike lanes, things like even just markings on the road. And there are several different ways to dedicate space on a street for bikes, whether it's a sharrow and simple markings on the road to dedicate that space, but that can increase the likelihood of casual riders using bicycles for transportation. And then an active roadway, of course, it depends on what types of streets you have going through your jurisdiction, but sometimes it's as simple as dedicating those 3 lanes. You have one way, or one lane for traffic one way, one lane for traffic another way, and then having a middle left turn only lane. So having those 3 main lanes leaves space for other modes of transportation. And then, like I mentioned, safe crosswalks, so making sure that the crosswalks are clearly marked, that there's appropriate signage, whether it's stop signs or stoplights. And then things like planting strips and green spaces can be really important when we're discussing street design, because planting strips can offer a sort of more inviting environment for pedestrians. It can offer a perception, that barrier of the traffic and the movement on the street, and green spaces offer a sort of reprieve from that concrete space. And also something that we could probably talk a little bit more in detail about, maybe at another conference or with specific projects, but offering green spaces can help with stormwater mitigation and more environmental concerns. So Complete Streets is a policy-oriented concept, and it takes into consideration other local and regional policies and local and regional funding sources, and then also our local and regional street networks. When we talk about street networks in this context, we're talking about the connectivity or lack of connectivity of streets that may accommodate or be a barrier to multiple modes of transportation networks. So the street networks refer to the design of integrated streets. This is important because when we're talking about complete streets, we're talking about the network or system of roads, not just the individual streets. We have many types of street networks in Hamilton County, and these are just a few of them here in this example. A traditional grid might be somewhere like downtown Cincinnati, a more urban area, and then a curvilinear loop could be in somewhere like Marymount, beginning of cul-de-sacs, or some of our townships, like this picture here makes me think of Beachmont Avenue in Anderson Township. And then more conventional cul-de-sacs, maybe some of our newer subdivisions in Whitewater or Harrison Township. And Complete Streets isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all model, so when we're engaging in discussions about this, the conversation is going to vary based on the neighborhood layout, the existing street networks, whether or not you have public transit routes in your neighborhood, and what the adjacent land uses are to the roads. And types of streets is really important for us to consider as planners and health officials as well, because engineers and those who are designing streets are classifying roads oftentimes by level of service, and they'll be identified with a sort of classification like A, B, C, or D. And level of service refers to the efficiency. What it's referring to then is like the efficiency of traffic moving through a roadway, and what are the delays at the intersections. So, of course, when we're talking about street networks and sort of integrating all these modes of transportation, we want to be aware of how we can prevent or reduce conflicts between street users. And this is something I didn't really think about even as a planner until I myself started biking to work last spring. I live in downtown Covington and I work downtown Cincinnati, so biking was about 5 miles or so to work, and I thought it'd be pretty easy. I'm not a very athletic person, but I thought, as a casual rider, I'm not on any busy roads, just sort of the streets through downtown Covington over the Roebling Bridge, and there's a separated sidewalk on the Roebling Bridge, so you're not with the cars, there's that barrier. But I do have to pass over streetcar tracks, and my first week of biking, my bike tire slid into the streetcar track, and I tumbled into this busy intersection, and it was awful. So it kind of made me think of I have noticed since then that there's signage in the streetcar, the stops where you get on and off the streetcar that mention things like that, like being careful of the tracks. But those are things that we need to educate kids about and educate other, bicyclists about, and just so that they know. Because I knew I had to pass the track at a 90-degree angle, but it was like I wasn't careful enough, and it could have been really dangerous.
So just to interrupt for a second, we've had some comments that people can't hear. Obviously, if you can hear me, you can let me know that you can hear me, but at the same time, I hope everyone can hear us. I'm trying to get some more information. I don't know what might be wrong, but
maybe we can mute.
Yeah, hey, let me just try to see what we can do. Hang on. So it seems to just be a problem with the computer audio, so just have people switch to the phone, and we'll just continue on, and hopefully everybody can get some audio going.
Well, we'll go ahead and just continue, and I'll try to talk a little louder. Maybe that was a problem. But yeah, go ahead and just send us messages. We can see your comments pop up. So if if more than a few people are having trouble hearing us, we could maybe go and get someone in IT. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll keep working through it, hopefully. And if not, certainly it's recording, so we can definitely send out the recording afterwards, and maybe the folks who can't hear now can at least hear it later.
So thanks for sticking with us. We'll go ahead and continue on. Here we go. I hope you didn't miss my bike story. So some of the benefits of complete streets, of course, is that, in most of our county, I think we're in a more urban county, we already have a street network designed, and so we might be talking a little bit more about retrofitting or reconfiguring streets rather than constructing new street designs. So then what that looks like for us is not constructing narrow roads, but narrowing existing roads. And some benefits of this that some studies have found, and some best practices in complete streets work in other areas of the country show that not only can this slow traffic, but it could increase safety for, of course, pedestrians and those on bikes. It provides options for healthy transportation, such as biking and walking, and then also allows that space for public transit to move more efficiently. And then if you're thinking about your own downtown district in your neighborhood, one of the obvious benefits of drivers and visitors moving more slowly on your roads is that they'll take notice of the business district. And of course, like I mentioned, just with the comment about having some green space, is that having less pavement reduces heat index and stormwater runoff, which is something we could talk about at another time. We don't want to get too much into that here because it's more technical, but that's absolutely a concern it's definitely a health concern when we're looking at our health index and talking about stormwater runoff. And and then there's also retrofitting roads to complete streets could be a great economic boost for our region through job creation. According to one of our resources, Smart Growth America, for every $1 million invested in trails and complete streets, there are 7 to 11 jobs created. And so this may vary a bit based on market and where in the region you are, but what that looks like in this study was it was 7 jobs created for auto-only projects, 10 for pedestrian projects, and then 11 for bicycle projects. So that's certainly something that we could look into a little bit more and see how relevant that is to our market and our region. And of course, reconfiguring existing roadways will give us an opportunity to offer options to street users.
I think one of the other pieces that we don't often talk about with the economics of this is if you're looking at paving a smaller area or, narrowing a road when you kind of retrofit, it reduces the cost of that project as well because there's less asphalt or concrete. And so, in general, if you have more sort of green space or sidewalk area, it can reduce the overall cost of the project, which is also generally a plus. I know everybody's always dealing with budgets and money and how do we make this work. So if you can do the same project but make it cheaper and make it a more attractive area for other users of the streets outside of automobiles, and that's kind of a win-win for everybody in a lot of cases. So,
and providing those green spaces too, I forgot to mention this, but even if it's a small green space, it can offer a destination point of sorts so that people could come and gather for picnics if you wanted to have plays in the park in the summer. So that offers opportunity for programming during the holidays or during summer months, and so that can be a very engaging activity for your community and for your residents as well. So these are images that may look a little bit familiar to us. I didn't want to focus too much on incomplete streets because I think we have a lot of great work going on in Hamilton County right now, and I don't want to focus on problems, but I do think that we need to talk a little bit about what an incomplete street is and why they could be inefficient or dangerous. And so basically, obviously incomplete streets are streets that do not provide options to accommodate all users, and as you can see in some of these images, it's not uncommon to find streets with no sidewalks, with inadequate bus stops, or bike lanes for people who do not drive. So this is very much what it looks like in parts of my bike ride to work, riding near parked cars and cars kind of zooming past. So even just offering other types of form of traffic slowing measures would help if you are on the roadway. So, having streets like this could really be a liability to many of our communities. For instance, if we're looking at how much money we're spending on capital improvements, filling in potholes and repairing sidewalks, and looking at how many injuries or deaths occur each year due to inefficient and unsafe streets. And Kim is going to talk a little bit about that specifically for our Hamilton County population.
Yeah, so when we look at the population, the overall population of Hamilton County, obviously it's a pretty diverse county in terms of areas and incomes, and there's 48 different political jurisdictions, and they're all a little bit different, but just kind of looking at the population overall, we know that about 27% of the population of the county is under the age of 18, so a lot of kids, young people, and really about 60% of households in the county have children living there. So those might be your own children, if you're a parent like I am, or it could be grandparents who are taking care of their grandchildren, or foster kids, but, well over half of all households have children in them. And I know I have a toddler at home, and he loves to be outside, and we love to take walks with him, but one of our big challenges is our neighborhood doesn't have sidewalks. We're lucky that it's a cul-de-sac neighborhood and doesn't really have a lot of traffic either, but it's definitely a concern with a toddler that likes to run around a lot, that, him being outside and we're walking in the street and really trying to make sure that he's safe. And so, and I know a lot of parents face similar concerns as your kids get older and they're wanting to ride bicycles, and maybe you want to ride the bicycles down to the park and go play on the playground, but there's no sidewalks, there's no bike lanes, so they're riding with traffic, and it's definitely a concern. We want kids and families to be active, but we also have to be aware that, it's one thing to expect adults to kind of walk in the street or ride their bikes in the road with traffic. It's a whole other thing when you talk about children. Another population that this can really impact is our seniors. So about 14% of the population of the county is over 65, and this is a percentage that's rising every year. The baby boom generation is getting older. I know my dad doesn't like to think of it, but he's getting ready to enter that 65 and over age group, even though he still considers himself to be about 40 in his head. But, this is a population that we want them to be active. It's great for their health from a health perspective. The more that they can be outside, that they can be walking and biking and just moving around, the better their health is going to be in the long term. But it's also another population that can really struggle with streets and things where there's no sidewalks or there's no bike lanes, or there's sidewalks but there's not adequate kind of curb cuts and things. So if they do use a walker or a wheelchair or a scooter, they do have some significant challenges kind of getting onto and off of the sidewalks. I know there's definitely been times down here around our offices that I've seen folks that have been trying to get to a bus stop where there's not a curb cut in front of the bus stop, and so they have to basically wait in the road with their wheelchair or their scooter while they're waiting on the bus. And that's definitely not a safe situation, either for the commuter who's waiting on the bus or for the people who are driving along the roads, especially in the early mornings or in the evenings when it's kind of dark. So it's definitely a challenge. So that's another population that we need to kind of think of as we're thinking about these things. Certainly, about 18% of the people in the county live below the poverty level, and this is another group that could have some significant challenges with transportation in terms of they may not have the income to have a car or a reliable car, or they may be a family that has only one car, so if there's two adults in the house, one may take the car to work and one may need to walk or bike to work or try to take the bus. So they can definitely be impacted by incomplete streets. And then looking at just some overall health concerns, we know almost 30% of adults in Hamilton County are considered obese, and it's a really high number, and it's a big problem. There's a lot of health concerns that can come along with obesity, and one of the things that we always talk about with that is, increase your physical activity, walk more. Instead of driving to the park, walk to the park. Instead of driving to the library, walk to the library. But that's a hard thing to ask people to do if they don't feel safe as they're walking. And so it's not the only solution to obesity, certainly. I mean, we can talk about diet and exercise and lots of other factors, but, it is one way to help people become more active by making those streets an inviting place for them to go and encouraging them to use more active forms of transportation instead of driving their cars everywhere.
And to that point, too, not to cut you off, but the issue of street harassment is something that will be presented at the next Connecting Active Communities Coalition, and I'll be presenting this topic there as well. And so Hannah Smith, who works with Kim here at Public Health, is going to be talking about street harassment, but in terms of infrastructure and how we can increase sort of at least the perception of safety and maybe even actual safety is providing adequate lighting, too, along the sidewalk. So, like, if you're getting off a bus stop and you're walking to the grocery store or walking home, that those sidewalks connect to places of goods and services that you're trying to reach, and that there's adequate lighting, too. I had meant to mention that issue of lighting in the beginning.
Yeah, and one of the other things that we also know is kind of a bonus is you increase the number of people who are out and about on the streets, you in general will find that crime will go down. People don't generally want to do illegal things if there's a whole bunch of people out walking and biking, and we call it eyes on the street, right? You're going to do those things in places that you feel kind of hidden, or places that you feel like, people are zooming by in their cars and they're not paying attention, not in front of a park where there's lots of families out playing, and so it can kind of be a bonus on that side as well. So there's a lot of kind of health concerns that can be impacted by getting people more active, from obesity to diabetes to the kind of just general physical and activity for adults. And it's certainly something that complete streets, it's not an overall solution to these problems, but it can definitely be a part of a solution and something that a community can do at a community level without having to kind of dip into kind of individual sort of educational things that can be a little bit more challenging. And then thinking about some of those safety things, these are some statistics that our epidemiologists put together. So when we look at the percent of motor vehicle crashes in the county that involved either a pedestrian or a bicyclist over the last 5 years that we have data from, so from 2010 to 2015, you can see the rates have kind of stayed fairly steady. The pedestrian rates have gone down just a little bit over the last year, or from 2014 to 2015. And they're not, overall it's not a huge number, but we also have a lot of highways and things in the county where there are no pedestrians or bicyclists, and those do account for a large percentage of the crashes as well. So kind of keeping that in perspective, we're hovering right around 1.5% of all the crashes in the county involve a pedestrian, and about half a percentage point, or right around 0.6%, involve a bicyclist. And one of the scary things about that is that we know when you're talking about an accident where it's car versus pedestrian or car versus bicyclist, that pedestrian or that bicyclist generally doesn't fare too well. It's pretty poor outcomes for those folks. And so if we can reduce those numbers, make it safer, or even reduce the speeds that the cars are traveling when they get into those crashes, then you're going to increase the survivability for the pedestrians and the bicyclists and really make it safer for everybody. I mean, that's what we all want. We don't want anybody, to be getting hurt or killed. I mean, I think there've been several news stories lately about people that have been hit by cars while they're crossing the street or doing things like that, and it's always a horrible, sad kind of thing, and it usually doesn't end well for the pedestrian or the bicyclist. Yeah. And so the more we can do to reduce those statistics, the better off we'll all be.
And so, with having said that, sort of introducing complete streets and talking a little bit about the problems of not taking those things into considerations and some of the health and safety issues, there are a lot of great efforts that are going on in the county right now that provide alternative transportation to residents in order to increase safety of the existing transportation methods. So actually, I just found this out yesterday, that April is Distracted Driving Awareness Month, and then May is Bike Month. So that seems appropriate to be having this webinar right now, and it's getting nicer outside, so we can encourage folks to go out more. But we have a lot of great momentum going on right now with bike trail planning in the county. Of course, there's the sidewalk and crosswalk improvements we're seeing in jurisdictions on a continual, constantly using those jurisdiction funds for infrastructure, capital improvements like that. Bus stop improvements and road diets are something that it's sort of a trendy thing to talk about right now, but we mentioned the benefits of narrowing roads, and so we're starting to hear some folks, some jurisdiction representatives and village administrators talking about things like road diets and taking different traffic calming measures. So our question as planners then and as public health officials is, how do we marry existing efforts with future goals to ensure that there are safe environments for our county residents? One of the projects going on right now in the city of Cincinnati, and as a planner for Hamilton County, I'm more familiar with the efforts in the county outside the city, because the city of Cincinnati has their own planning department, of course, but there are agencies like Tri-State Trails and Groundwork that are working collaboratively to connect the efforts that are going on inside the city of Cincinnati and outside the city of Cincinnati within the county. And it's really great because it's providing more of a network of trails, because, I think it's great to say, like, here's this mile bike trail here that I could take the kids to, but it's benefits so much on an economic level, and then just in terms of, like, if you're talking about alternative transportation to and from work or stores, that you want to have more of a connection than that, like going to places. And so the city of Cincinnati has been working on this project, Cincinnati Connects, for years now, and here's a map, an image that shows the potential bikeways or bike trails and the existing paths. And so what I love about this is that we have a local effort going on right now that I've been involved in, and I'm really excited about, and it's called the Mill Creek Collaborative. So the Mill Creek Collaborative is a little subgroup of the Connecting Active Communities Coalition, which has been around for several years and has a lot of great trail and active transportation advocates in our jurisdictions. And so this effort, the Mill Creek Collaborative has been working on, is to create a greenway trail, a bike path and trail along the Mill Creek. So what you're seeing on this map here in this sort of green triangle on the eastern side of the triangle is the Mill Creek that travels up through Reading, Evendale, and Sharonville. And so on the southern tip of Reading, near Arlington Heights, that's where that previous map I showed you, Cincinnati Connects, is proposing to have a bike trail or a bike pedestrian sort of greenway trail up the Mill Creek to that point. And then the Mill Creek Collaborative then hopes to pick up there and connect a trail up to Sharon Woods. And so what's been really fantastic about this project is that the dedication of all three jurisdictions is there, and there's enthusiasm and there's support from Great Parks of Hamilton County, of course, Planning and Development are on board, groups like Tri-State Trails and Groundwork, and we really have some great momentum going with this project right now. We've actually been actively presenting to the sub-council committees and full councils in order to gain support to work collaboratively on this trail, and that's going to help so much when we're talking about funding applications, because there's really a lot of focus right now on multi-jurisdictional projects, and at the county we love to see those, and a lot of funders do, a lot of grants applications ask for that too, and we'll score more highly for those things, so that's fantastic. And we also have many communities in Hamilton County right now that are utilizing Safe Routes to School funds, and then, Kim, maybe you could talk a little bit about the communities in We Thrive that are working with Safe Routes to School. I have a little bit of experience working with Evendale and Sharonville in a shared application to create a school travel plan, but Safe Routes to School essentially is a federally funded project to encourage kids K through 8 to walk or bike to school. And so, like Kim had mentioned, that's a lot to ask if there's not that infrastructure to provide a safe environment for kids to do that.
Yeah, and Safe Routes is a great way to link the local school districts or even private and parochial schools that might sit in a community with the community and kind of start to build that partnership. A lot of times it's hard to get support for some of these projects if it's just coming from like one person or a small group within the community, but if you can get the schools involved, most people will agree that, kids, we'll get behind the kids. I always say everybody wants to, save the kids and keep the kids safe.
What about the kids?
Everybody loves the kids. And Safe Routes provides a really nice framework for kind of how to make that linkage. As part of the Safe Routes process, a district and the communities that it sits within will put together a school travel plan where you kind of assess the needs of the community and look at how kids are currently getting to school and what some of the barriers to walking and biking to school might be. Why parents aren't letting them walk or bike to school, what some of the safety concerns are with that, and then sort of coming up with ways to address those barriers and issues. And so it can be infrastructure projects, things like sidewalks and crosswalks and better lighting, linking sidewalks to the school or connecting up places where you have sidewalks and then gaps in sidewalks. But it can also be things like education, so education for parents, education for students on how to be safe pedestrians or safely ride your bike, and also education for the school, within the school for teachers or for staff, and then education for the community, educating people on, what do those school zone signs really mean? What are you supposed to do? Why is it important that you slow down? Nobody wants to drive 20 miles an hour right in front of the school, but it is an important, an important thing to do. And it also includes things like encouragement, so encouraging more kids to walk and bike to school, enforcement, so working with local law enforcement to enforce existing rules, things like school zones for speed limits or, not turning right on red during certain hours or different things like that. So there's a lot that is involved in that, and we have a lot of communities that are doing some stuff. So you can see on this slide there's a picture from Woodlawn Elementary's Walk to School Day in 2016. So Walk to School Day is an annual event that happens in October of every year where schools can encourage kids to walk and bike to school on that day and usually do some fun stuff. I think they had like breakfast for the kids and there was balloons and they walked with the teachers and the administrators and it was really fun. So a lot of different schools do programs like that. We also have schools or communities that have gotten funding through the Ohio Department of Transportation Safe Routes to School grants to do some of those infrastructure projects. So Norwood's a great example of a community that's gotten quite a bit of money, and Woodlawn as well, to do some work with sidewalks and speed humps and crosswalk striping, things like that, that the community knew was important but just didn't have the funds to do. It's a great way to get some grant funds for that. And the nice thing about Safe Routes to School funds, that if you do any grant writing, you might be interested to know, is that those grants don't require matching funds from the community. So a lot of times the funds from ODOT and other grants that we'll talk about require a match, usually a 15 or 20% match. But the Safe Routes to School funds do not. So it's a great opportunity to get some money to do some projects that you might see a need for, but that you just don't quite have the funding to do. So,
and that's a great segue for us to talk a little bit more about funding sources for projects, because like Kim had mentioned, yes, it's a project to encourage kids to walk and bike to school, but the whole community benefits, and your community then is receiving those federal dollars funneled into your community. And what's great about a great example that Woodlawn is that they use their CDBG funds to redo the pedestrian bridge over the Mill Creek. And so if they have the kids dropped off at the Woodlawn Rec Center there, they can walk safely over the pedestrian bridge to this great trail that they have up to the school. And so there's just a lot of little bits and pieces that are falling into place to create this safe environment where you would feel comfortable to allow your kids, to drop them off and know they're going to get to school safely. So there are quite a few funding sources, and you can be a little bit creative. We've sort of explained, we'll use terms like ODOT, OKI, maybe some folks don't know what that stands for. So, of course, Ohio Department of Transportation, and then OKI is our Regional Council of Governments, and Safe Routes to School are funds that you can apply for through both OKI and ODOT. We have our Hamilton County Engineers Office has some funding available, which we'll talk a little bit more in a minute. Community Development Block Grants, probably most of you are familiar with, and oftentimes already have those funds sort of budgeted out in your budget line items, so that might not be some money that you feel you could be flexible with, but that's a source. And then Ohio Department of Natural Resources, or ODNR, Interact for Health has some grants available, and then oftentimes there are local funders or foundations that we would be happy to keep an eye out for and help you locate. So this is a little bit of a wordy text slide, but it's a little bit more in detail. So also through ODOT and OKI, there are grants you can apply for surface transportation program funding or transportation alternative fundings, and that's the Safe Routes to School falls under the transportation alternative funding. There's a safety program through ODOT, and those are monies that are dedicated to bike and pedestrian projects in high crash areas. And then you can even be a little bit creative and apply for funds like Congestion Mitigation Air Quality, or CMAQ. If you are constructing it, there are plenty of statistics out there, and there's a great EPI team here at Public Health that could provide statistics for pollution and how reduced stormwater runoff, for having less pavement on the roads, for narrowing your roads, for offering other forms of transportation like bike trails.
And I think, and the big thing is, there's the big ones, a lot of them are through the Ohio Department of Transportation, but like Stacey said, you can be creative, think outside the box. I know we've had communities look into, there's some grants available through places like the Ohio Department of Natural Resources that help mitigate like stormwater runoff. So they were looking at putting in a trail, and they realized if they put in the trail with pervious pavement, they could get some of those grant dollars to pay for it instead of having to pay for it themselves, because then it would reduce runoff. So there's lots of kind of unconventional sources of funding as well.
And I myself am not a grant writer, and so I know that it's not as easy as it sounds, and that oftentimes in order to be eligible for those grant dollars to even apply in the first place, you have to have access to right-of-way, and you have to have sort of deeds showing that. So, I know that there's a lot that goes into we were just talking about this yesterday at one of our bike trail planning meetings, that sometimes it's not as easy as just, okay, here's the application deadline. But you have a partner in Hamilton County Public Health and Hamilton County Planning and Development, and we can work with you to get all your ducks in a row in order to apply for those funds. And something that's really promising is that we just recently, the OKI Transportation Plan for 2040 was revised, and in the last cycle, I believe it was 2 bike ped projects, and now there were 19 that were approved. And so it's just, there are a lot of people out here that are advocating for bike pedestrian projects for a lot of reasons, and, you know, the funders are on board, so.
Yep.
So, you know, the funding is out there, and because Complete Streets can encourage community and regional growth and safety, we want to talk a little bit about what Complete Streets policies can do for Hamilton County. And there are already these great efforts underway, and having Complete Streets policies basically offers guidelines for future projects and a more cohesive planning strategy. It doesn't necessarily say, like, okay, you've got this policy in place, your jurisdiction has to pay such and such amount of funds to, like, you're not accountable to those certain dollars. A Complete Streets policy can be something that's a sort of introductory resolution to say we're going to incorporate this language into our planning documents so that we are consistently designing and constructing right-of-ways to accommodate all anticipated street users. And so it could be something as simple as that. And
yeah, and I think a lot of times, I feel like this slide got out of order, but that's okay. A lot of times with these policies, it's to put things in place so in the future, as you start to do resurfacing projects or projects where you're looking at redoing a business corridor, then you can incorporate the Complete Streets work into that. It doesn't mean that you have to start those projects right away.
It's say, oh, we have to reconfigure all of our streets right now.
Right. It's sort of setting things up so in the future, as projects come up, you have a policy that helps guide your planning and the work that you're doing. And a lot of times that's really important because while you may have people in a community administration right now that are really into bike lanes or sidewalks or this Complete Streets idea. If those people leave in the future and you get new people in, without kind of a formal policy in place, you don't know what that's going to look like. So having a policy there is a really good way to ensure that this is something that your community kind of can continue going forward no matter who the elected officials are, no matter who the administrators are or the planners or whatever. Because, you know, people turn over, people leave for various reasons, they get new jobs, opinions change. Definitely with elected officials, you get new folks in, someone might lose an election and you get a new council person or a new trustee. And so a policy is a really good way, if you can put it in place now while there's excitement and momentum, then that's a way to ensure that for the future moving forward, you still have that assurance that this is something that we can fall back on.
That's a really good point. And to that point, there was in December of 2014 on a federal level was the first federal transportation legislation that was passed that included language of Complete Streets, and it was called FAST Act, which is Fixing America's Surface Transportation. And someone in my office yesterday just noted the irony of that name, which I hadn't thought about, but it's true. So this is a 3-year, $305 billion bill that was signed into law, and like I said, in 2014. What it does is it increases funding for repair of public transit. It requires the Secretary of Transportation to report on progress of project implementation, and it encourages jurisdictions at a state and local level to incorporate Complete Streets language and designs into planning and engineering documents. So Hamilton County, actually, we just took into consideration Complete Streets when adopting our new, updating our new thoroughfare plan. So this was just effective, as you can see on the date here, effective March 17th. So this is a pretty new update. But we used design tools to have discussions with Hamilton County jurisdictions about Complete Streets, and then its near counterpart from a transportation sector, something called context-sensitive design. And the final product of this was that, there was a balancing act between the county engineer's office planning for road expansions and right-of-way needs, and then communities planning for walkable, pedestrian-oriented places and having those green spaces and destination spots. And then also our regional council of governments, OKI has their thoroughfare plan, and we want to make sure that they're administering large amounts of federal money to transportation needs and transportation projects, and so we want to make sure that our jurisdictions and that our planning documents align with those. So our compromise on this was to sort of plan to plan and give local jurisdictions the ability to initiate planning processes for complete streets in context-sensitive design with the engineer and OKI as participants. And our takeaway from this is there's still quite a bit of work to do, but as Kim mentioned, this sets us up for sustainability and planning for future projects. And so here's an example of some complete streets work, and this is actually a couple maps ago when I showed you that green triangle that the Mill Creek Collaborative is working on right now, and Evendale, Reading, and Sharonville. There's already been so much work done on other parts of that trail. There's been work to complete, not just from our department, but there's been work to complete the very top of that triangle, which is a connection of from Sharon Woods to Wayne Woods. And so this is one of the products of some of the design tools that we used to show what it would look like to have a bicycle corridor. And so we did this was before my time, but the staff used street section reconfigurations to show how bicycles could better be incorporated into the street. And the end goal, of course, being to connect the big parks, and we're continuing that work now with Connecting Active Communities Coalition and the Mill Creek Collaborative. And staff took this map to several jurisdictions, I believe it was 6 in total, that this road runs through. And they used this tool here called streetmix.net, and basically it's a design tool that lets you it takes into account the existing right-of-way and test out a variety of street compositions, so you can kind of play around with a little bit and see what's going to work best for your community. And it includes various types of bicycle lanes on-street and off-street, and public transit infrastructure and sidewalks and crosswalks and building, like how far are buildings set back from the road and from the streets. And this is helpful because a right-of-way is often a pretty rigid constraint, and it's not likely to be altered without some property acquisition, which adds cost to a project. So we want to look at what can happen within the right-of-way, and that might be a little bit easier. So this is a great tool, and this can be used then, and of course it's got these great renderings. It's very aesthetically pleasing. You can use this to persuade elected officials and talk with the public about what's possible.
Yeah, and so as we're kind of talking about some of this policy piece, so there's policies that can happen at the county level. There's certainly policies that happen, at Hamilton County Planning and Development. There's policies that happen here at the Health Department. The county commissioners can adopt policies, but one of the most important policy pieces are really the policies that can happen at the local level for your local jurisdiction. So at your township, your village, or your city, and looking at these complete streets policies. And a lot of times that can be really daunting for people to think, how do we go about even getting these policies started? That sounds really complicated. And so one of the nice things is there's already some really great policy model language out there that you can start with, because I've found it's way easier to start with something and then edit it to fit your needs than kind of looking at a blank page and thinking, oh my goodness, how do I write this policy? And so both Change Lab Solutions and Smart Growth America have really nice model complete street policies that you can look up online. You can download them. They're completely editable and modifiable. You can add language to them. You can take pieces out that, aren't going to work for your community or that you don't think are right. And then there's been a couple local policies passed as well that you can, talk to your neighboring jurisdictions. I know Amberley Village just recently passed. They called it a pedestrian safety resolution, but it's really a complete streets policy. That's a good example of how they made it work for them and their community. They had a couple council people who didn't really like the term complete streets, and so they were able to kind of take that specific language out but keep the intent of the policy the same. And it's a nice example of kind of how to make things work for your community and the way that your community is ready and what they're ready for. So the first step is always to kind of think about a draft policy, get something down on paper so that you have something for people to react to. And then set up meetings with, if you're not an elected official or a member of administration of a community, if you're just a resident that's interested, set up some meetings with your representatives or your administrators. Every community is a little different in how they're structured and who the right person is to talk to. Sometimes there's a council member that's really into this type of thing, or sometimes it's the city or village administrator. Sometimes there might be someone within the recreation department. You kind of have to feel out your own community as to who those right people are, but set up some meetings and explain to them why you're passionate about this and what you're trying to do. And kind of find that champion that you can work with that can kind of help you out. Because you're going to need that champion to take your policy to your council or your trustees or that body of elected officials that can make the decisions. And sometimes, a starting point is going to council and speaking during those public sessions. Every council has usually a portion of the beginning of the meeting where public can sign in to speak on an issue for 3 to 5 minutes, and might be a way to help identify elected officials that might be interested or feel out where they are. But doing that outreach, both with the elected officials and the public in your community, is really important. You want people to understand what you're trying to do and why it's important, and to get behind you and not kind of be fighting against you. So a lot of times doing that groundwork and really doing that education and figuring out what people's concerns are. Maybe they're concerned that if you narrow the road, it's going to cause traffic backup and they have to get to and from work and they don't want their commute to be longer. So figuring out what the concerns are and addressing those concerns and trying to alleviate some of the fears that happen. People don't like change, and you start talking about changing things and they can get really sort of upset, and that's understandable, but that's where that education piece comes in. And then work through the legislative process of your community. So again, every community works a little differently. Some councils require 3 readings, some do 2. A lot of times for like a board of trustees, they can just take it to the board once and pass something, but figure out what that process is, work with your elected officials to kind of work through whatever the process is in terms of getting legislation passed. And hopefully, if you've done your homework and you've done that groundwork, when you finally do take the policy to your elected officials, they'll be really likely to pass it, and then you'll have something that's there for kind of years to come.
And of course, other resources we've already mentioned that Smart Growth America has this National Complete Streets Coalition, which offers workbooks on local policy for complete streets, and so you can and it has that model language that Kim was referring to. And then, of course, we are your partners as well, so take advantage of us here at Hamilton County Public Health and Hamilton County Planning and Development, because we already are focused on efforts like this, and we'd love to help you get in contact or start something in your community or move through a problem in your community or help mediate in any way that we can. And I also got this great resource. It's a bike pedestrian project funding source from someone at ODOT District 8, which Hamilton County is in District 8, and it's 3 pages of funding sources available for pedestrian and bicycle facilities and projects, and it goes a little bit more into detail with which projects are eligible, the local match minimum. It discusses who the issuing agency is and the deadline and who's eligible to apply. Sometimes it has to be local government, sometimes it's only for 501c3. So sometimes it's the school district, or it can vary, but that's where those partnerships can come in handy. So don't be afraid to reach out to entities within your community that you can work with. So whether it's the schools or local groups like the Connecting Active Communities Coalition, or if there's a particular business in your community that might be focused on runners or bikers or something like that. A lot of times, reaching out to some of those groups can really give you open up additional sources of funding and additional sources of volunteers, especially as you're trying to build support for these projects in your community. It can be a great way to kind of build that public support with people that are already trying to maybe utilize the streets for these things and would love to see them made more safe or more accessible. And be aware of the specific needs within your community too. So if you know that your community has a large assisted living facility with a lot of seniors, then maybe reach out to those folks and ask what type of needs they're seeing, what needs of theirs aren't being met. Or if you know that, you have an elementary school within your community that's not very well connected to sidewalks, talk to the parents at the school or the school board and see what kind of needs they see or fears that they might have. I know a lot of communities. I live up in Sims Township, very near Loveland, and the Little Miami Bike Trail is only about a quarter of a mile from my house.
but it's down a busy street with no bike lanes and no sidewalks. And so while the trail is right there, and in theory I can utilize it really easily, you know, there's myself and a lot of people in my neighborhood that feel like there's such a barrier to getting to the trail. We actually have to get in our cars and drive down to the trail and half a mile to park the car and go for a bike ride. So, you know, talk to your friends, your neighbors, the residents in your community, you know, and you might learn some things and find out what the challenges are, and that'll give you a good idea of what you can do to kind of
move that project forward. And, you know, of course, feel free to contact either one of us.
Yeah.
And we have a couple more minutes, just 5 minutes left. I think we did pretty good on time. If there are any questions, leave it open for a minute if anyone wants to type any questions out for either of us. And, of course, you can call or email either of us if you have questions about a specific project, or if, you know, anything to add or edit to what we've presented.
Yeah, and we love to hear from people. The recording of the webinar will be available soon on the Watch Us Thrive YouTube channel, which you can find via watchusthrive.org, which is the website for the We Thrive program here at Hamilton County Public Health. I encourage you to go to that website and check it out a little bit, too. It has a lot of great ideas of things that communities in Hamilton County have done related to a lot of different things, but some of them are related to kind of active transportation and kind of complete streets. And sometimes it's interesting to see what other communities have done. It might give you some ideas, but it's also got some good resources. Like I said, you can link to the YouTube channel and see recordings of previous webinars. This recording will be available there, as well as a whole host of other topics. And if you're interested in being on the list for future webinars that we do try to do about one a month on a variety of topics. You can certainly email me and let me know, and I can make sure that we send that schedule out to you so that if there's anything else you're interested in, you can join us, because we love to have folks share information with people and get the word out about the things that we're doing. So,
well, it doesn't look like there's any questions, so I guess we could go ahead and just end our webinar for today. But it was really great talking about this topic with you all, and I hope to hear from some of you.
Yeah, thank you so much.